Hi there, my name is Joy Mayer, and I am the director of a project called Trusting News. We work with newsrooms to test out strategies for demonstrating credibility and earning trust. We focus on things any journalist can do day to day, and we do a lot of training for journalists about how they can really take ownership over building a relationship based on trust with the people they aim to serve. I'm here today to talk about how we tell the story of our journalism. Nobody but us is going to tell that story, so we have some ideas about where and how we can make it clear who we are and what we're here to do and why that is a mission people should get behind. This video is being created for members of Lion, but we think it could be relevant for other folks as well, so feel free to share it. So I would like to start with just a quick research fact. I think we probably all know that trust in news media has been on the decline since a few years after Watergate. It actually peaked in the late 70s and has been declining ever since. You can see that it hit its lowest point in 2016. 32% of people said they had a great deal or a fair amount of trust in the news. It did, here's a slightly more recent look. It did go up again, down again. So we are, there's some volatility there, and it has not stayed quite as low as it was right after the last election. But it is important to recognize that this is where we are in a larger news climate. And that includes you, no matter what kind of journalism you do. It includes you, Lion members. You are part of the mass media. And I think it's really important that we understand how confusing it is to be a consumer of mass media, how overwhelming it can seem to figure out what is worthy of trust, and that it's up to us to figure out why our work is credible. Not necessarily why the news media overall are credible, but why the work that we do is credible. And Lion outlines, in criteria for membership, here are the values that we hold dear, and here's what we expect to see when we look into news organizations and evaluate them for membership in Lion. So what we're going to do today is talk through some values of trusting news and some things that we've learned in our work with newsrooms over the past 5 years, and where those two things are in alignment. So remember that not all journalism is good. I get real frustrated sometimes when I consume things done in the name of journalism, and I think, gosh, that's irresponsible, or that's careless, or they're just not being clear about where they're coming from, or those people aren't even journalists, they're just talking heads on TV, but the whole world is associating that with journalism. There are a lot of things that happen that that contribute to journalism being confusing to navigate. So you do not get automatic credit for doing credible, mission-driven, responsible, ethical, careful journalism. Journalists, we tend to value skepticism and yet get real defensive when people demand accountability from us or seem skeptical. We don't get to say, trust me, I'm a journalist, and just expect automatic trust. That's not this kind of society I think we want either. And we have high standards for each other. And so I think it's important to start from that, some sort of a validation of the public's skepticism, and it is a desire to help them make smart choices in their information diet. So tell the story of the mission, ethics, and processes behind the work that you do and that your colleagues do and that other journalism that you believe in. My goal is to help us teach people what quality journalism looks like so that they can make smarter choices. Remember, one little other bit of philosophy to share here. The concept of trust is a complicated one. It's a problematic word because it can mean a lot of different things. But fundamentally, when you think about who you trust, both interpersonally and what organizations and brands you trust, it involves both head and heart. It involves cognitive dimensions, which journalists tend to feel really comfortable with because that's facts. I'm going to outline for you the reasons that you can trust me, or the reasons that this story is credible. And we're going to demonstrate for you our competency and our reliability in these ways. That's sort of evidence-based. But then there's also affective trust, which is more about how people feel. Do I think that you have good intentions? Are we on the same side? Do I feel connected to you? Do I feel like you want what's best for me or for our community? And that's a trickier one for journalists to deal in because, It involves, how do people feel when they leave interactions with us? How do they feel after they consume news? It's harder to control for and harder to fight back against, but it is an important aspect. This stat from Pew, I think, is really interesting, especially for people who practice local journalism. They asked, have you ever spoken with a local journalist? And only 21% of people said they had ever spoken with or been interviewed by a local journalist. And it gets more problematic. That number goes down the less white, old, educated, and rich you are. So there are a lot of people in this country who don't have any experience with local journalists, certainly aren't giving us the benefit of the doubt. They don't know any. They don't know any personally. They're not friends with any. They might not have ever talked to any. And so in terms of building trust and that sort of affinity and that effective dimensions of trust, we got a long way to go. So let's start with talking about the aspects of what it means to tell the story of our work. And I want you to think about your website, and we're going to go through some examples of what can be here. I would like you to look at these key questions that people should be able to find answers to on your website, and then think about whether they're there. So who are you and what do you cover? I cannot tell you how often I go to a news website and I can't tell where geographically they are, the name of a single person who's behind it, what they're there to do and what they cover and what their priorities are. Can't tell. So if you would like people to invest in your work, either with their time or with their relationship and trust or financially, they need to understand what you're here to do and what makes you special. So think about where on your website they could find answers to things like, what do you believe in and value? What is the scope of your coverage? What makes you different from other media in your market? What do you hope to accomplish? What does success look like? What are your goals for your community or for your organization? What impact do you have? Can you point to any way that you've made a difference? And what is your history? How long have you been around? So a few examples, Raleigh Convergence. Sarah has a really great statement here. Raleigh is our home. We want to strengthen our collective community by celebrating its people and thoughtfully discussing areas where we can do better. I love that pairing of celebrating and also being willing to sort of criticize or examine things that could be better. We believe y'all means all. We believe in truth-telling, accuracy, and fairness. We believe in the power of stories. There's a lot of really good stuff here that just gives you a sense of the values behind the organization. Scalawag has a really great mission statement. We illuminate dissent, unsettle dominant narratives, pursue justice and liberation, and stand in solidarity with marginalized people and communities in the South. One reason I think it's exciting to talk to Lion about this specific topic is that, a lot of members of Lion have very sort of niche or value-driven or specific missions that can be more relatable or less generic, I guess, than a lot of big legacy news organizations that try to be everything to the people of a big metro area. So I think it's really interesting to think about why you got into business, what niche you fill, and how you're articulating that. Scalawag also publishes their theory of change, community-driven reporting, the outcomes, impact, just really articulating goals. Another question that I really hope people can find answers to on your website, but sometimes they cannot, is who are you owned by and where does your money come from? We know that people make a lot of assumptions about the relationship between money and journalism. They make assumptions about how money influences journalism. They make assumptions about, corporate ownership influencing journalism, donors, advertisers influencing journalism. So I think it's important to be very clear about that. Too many people assume that money influences what you cover. And a lot of times we talk at Trusting News about having a counter narrative. If people make this assumption, what is your counter narrative? Do you have one? Because if people are out in the world making accusations about your work or questioning your integrity, you should be part of that public conversation and have a defense ready to explain, that might be true in some cases. Of course, sometimes money influences journalism, right? Not in the newsrooms I've been lucky enough to work in, but you sure hear horror stories. So again, don't worry about the whole industry. Explain your work. At Spokane Faves, Tracy has a really great statement that says, we first started in this way. We were created through a generous grant here. Now we're independently owned and operate as a 501c3. We're supported in part by this foundation. We have a board of directors. And then they outline, in seeking and accepting financial support, we will follow these practices in terms of who we identify, in terms of assuring that those people don't have any role in determining or assigning journalistic content. And we will also refuse financial contributions in these particular situations. We do maintain a firewall between news coverage and sources of revenue. Financial supporters will have no voice in editorial decisions. I think that very often that's just not said clearly enough. Oklahoma Watch does a good job of it here as well. Accepting financial support does not mean we endorse donors or their products, services, or opinions. Our news judgments are made independently, not based on or influenced by donors or any revenue source. We do not give supporters the rights to assign, review, or edit content. I love how clear that is. It says it in a few different ways just to clear it up. A benefit of having something like this articulated is that you can link to it repeatedly. In an email, if somebody is expressing a strong opinion or an accusation, you're only covering this story because they give you money. In social posts, in stories, when you disclose that somebody you're writing about has given you money, always link back to this and say, but that funding is separate from editorial decisions. Read more about that here. And in comments, when people question your independence, having something to link back to is really important. Next question, I hope people can find answers to on your website, is what ethical principles is your work based on? Too many people would chuckle at the idea of journalism ethics. And I think, that's on us because we don't really talk about them. How do you approach accuracy? How do you work to be fair? How do you work to be correct? What do you do if you get something wrong? How about conflicts of interest with funding, with your staff? How do you handle things like anonymous sources? There are just so many things that could be included in your ethics. And when possible, those should be made public on your website so that you can link back to them. The Colorado Sun's policy is so thorough. I want to walk you through a few aspects of it that I really, really like. We are in the business of truth. We seek it, we record it, and we present it to the public. So our state and our community can better understand itself. For this to work, our journalists must tell the truth without any other agenda, and our readers must be able to trust that they do. We promise readers that our journalists always seek the truth earnestly and with integrity, independence, compassion, and accountability. Here's the rest of our code of ethics. So they talk about paying for information. And again, they just get very specific and relatable. We do not pay sources for interviews. We might pay to run their content the same as we would for freelance journalists. We might also buy them a cup of coffee. And we pay fees for public records. We don't disguise ourselves or pretend to be who we're not. Here's exactly what we mean by on and off the record. Man, I would love to see this articulated more often because a lot of people we talk to just don't know. And then opinion coverage, and I'll say more about this in a minute, but stating that we clearly label opinion pieces is really important. And it says we should avoid words like editorial or perspective, which can have multiple meanings. Absolutely true. Journalists like to talk about the editorial department as being the newsroom, but then we run an editorial and wonder why people are confused about who wrote that and why. So important to articulate. Another thing you could outline in an ethics policy is how do you verify information? Showing how you know something is accurate is really important. Showing why you trust the sources you used. So maybe you can include notes or boxes with stories with process information. Here's how we reported this. Talk about what you don't know. Maybe like, here's what we know so far, or questions we're still asking. Talk about how you fact check. And by that, I mean how you check for accuracy before you publish, and also how you do the public form of journalism known as fact checking, when you hold people accountable and double check what they say. And especially when in big breaking news stories, we're living through a few of them right now, how does information change, and why was something maybe true when you reported it and has been updated now? It's really important to show how your ethics work day to day. Here's an example from USC Annenberg, student media at USC. The left is an excerpt from a story. about why they decided to let a student remain anonymous. They said the student who identifies himself as a gay male and has not come out asked to speak anonymously, and then they have a sentence that relates and describes their ethics policy. Because the information he shared involves his personal medical information and his sexual orientation, we are honoring his request in accordance with our ethics policy. And that link goes to what you see on the right, which is their sortable ethics guide with a link for each section. So it's just really nicely done. It doesn't just link and say, read about our use of anonymous sources here. It describes it and then invites people to learn more if they want to. The next question I hope people can find an answer to on your website is, who are the journalists behind your work and how can people get in touch with them? This is so hard. I spend a lot of time trying to contact journalists, and on a lot of news websites, I can't find a staff list. And I can't find any contact information beyond sort of the generic, news@tribune.com kind of thing. So consider including, when you're talking about your staff, things like who is on your staff and what they do. Maybe some professional information, maybe some personal information. Talk about people's jobs in a way that makes sense. Don't just say he edits these things on these days or is in charge of this report, those might not be words that are familiar to people and might not make sense in terms of why someone would want to get in touch with them. And definitely include contact information. And think about that in terms of tasks people might want to accomplish on your website. If you're looking to do this, contact this person. Public Source has just a great example. Their contact us page is oriented around tasks. Do you have a question about this? Do you want to pitch a story? Do you want to sponsor or advertise? Do you want to donate money? Here's who you contact with specific people and their email addresses. I just love that. When you see their team, you see pictures and then names and titles and contact information. And then when you click on those, you also get a bio that includes, and I think it's important to, recognize that some journalists will feel comfortable sharing more about their personal lives than others. But if you think about the goal of a bio, it's professional credibility. What makes you good at this job? What makes you right for this job? What makes your reporting on this topic credible? And then also anything that might help people connect. We've lived here for this long, have kids in schools, favorite activities. People will feel comfortable saying different amounts of things there, and that's okay. Another idea for sharing the people and staff and vision behind the work is to create a paper handout for when you're out reporting in person. This is an example from a newspaper in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And they have a really nice half-page handout that they can take around the community. Here's where we invite you to tell us what you notice around your community that you think might need coverage. Here's the type of thing we do. We're locally owned. We hope you subscribe. We want you to trust that our journalism is accurate, honest, and fair. If you see something wrong, don't be Iowa nice. Tell us so we can fix it and improve, actively seeking feedback, and then ways that you can get in touch. This could also be a social media image that gets attached to, that gets posted on social. It could also get attached to emails. Just think about how you're taking advantage of individual interactions you have with people to tell the story of your work. And then another question I would very much like to raise is how you separate news and opinion coverage. I think a lot of the accusations that journalism is biased and partisan and unfair, there's a lot of conversations journalists need to be having about news and how it's produced. I think there's definite improvements we could make there in terms of transparency and credibility, but I also think it's a big problem that people genuinely can't tell what they're consuming. It's easy to blame this on the 24-hour national TV news cycle, and I think that's valid. A lot of times I'll turn on the TV and I'll see 6 talking heads, and I don't know, unless I'm a regular viewer, who's an analyst and who's an anchor, who's a reporter, who's a paid source, who's just sort of an outside expert. It can be very hard to tell. So I think that that's true, and that's where a lot of people get their information. But we need to do a much better job of helping people understand the goal behind different pieces of things of news that we publish. So is a piece of content designed to persuade, or is it designed to inform? That shouldn't be a piece of information that people have to hunt for or wonder about. It should be made completely clear, and I cannot figure out why as an industry we're not committed to making that more clear. A lot of people are fine consuming both news and opinion. They're just frustrated when they can't tell the difference. They're also confused because of the atomized way content travels. And what I mean by this is, a text story might make perfect sense on a news website or in a print paper. But when it goes to social media, you can't tell. It loses sort of its furniture that comes with it, its labeling, its structure, and taken out of context, you can't tell that it's opinion. The same can be true for radio. A piece that you hear in the context of a newscast might make perfect sense there, but when that voice appears in my NPR One app, it doesn't come with the information about who's speaking or what this sort of essay spot is designed to accomplish. So here's an example of that. The Baltimore Sun wrote a really powerful editorial rebuking defending its community against something the president had said. And even a journalist, Jim Acosta, tweeted it and says, the Baltimore Sun is responding to Trump. And I imagine that the political reporters of the Baltimore Sun did not feel like this framing does them any favors, because this is not the newsroom of the Baltimore Sun responding to Trump. It's the editorial board of the Baltimore Sun responding to Trump. And I just want to make it clear that, nowhere, if you look here, is there information in the chatter, the headline, the image that says this is a piece of opinion content. As opposed to sites like Wisconsin Watch that put the word opinion at the front of the headline. In this case, it also has a kicker above the headline. I'm a big fan of putting that word opinion at the front of the headline, not editorial, maybe not even column, not the name of the columnist, because that is not clear except to your most regular readers. It needs to have the word opinion with it, and that needs to travel. As this one does from Colorado Sun, the word opinion, as they said in their ethics policy that they would be clear about this, the word opinion is at the front, and when you post it on Facebook, the word opinion comes with it because it's part of the structure of the headline. So I really invite you to take a look. If you publish opinion, I did notice looking through several Lion sites that where opinion is published, the labeling is really inconsistent. And so I do encourage you to take a look at all the places your headline might show up and whether it's clear on that platform what's opinion content. And then the last question I want to ask with you is, do you want to host conversations with your community and hear from them, both about what's happening in their lives and about your journalism? And what does that look like if so? Do you issue specific invitations and say, we'd like to hear from you on this, please weigh in on this, please fill us in on this? Or do you just kind of leave comments and figure that that does enough? Do you invest in those conversations? Do you validate and reward participation? It doesn't take very long to like comments or thank people for commenting. Do you look for chances to show that you're listening, asking follow-up questions, say more about that? Oh, you might be interested in this link. Do you participate as if you're hosting the conversation? When your work is informed by what you hear from those conversations, do you acknowledge that? Do you say, we heard from reader so-and-so that this, so we're doing more, or we saw that there was a lot of interest based on this conversation, so we're doing a follow-up story? And do you invite and answer questions about your work? Do you say, we want to be worthy of your trust, how could we do better? Do you say, what questions do you have about how the story was reported, or about how we decide what to cover in election season, or any other topic? They do a great job of this at Chalkbeat, hosting conversations in a variety of ways. Here's one example from Caroline Bauman. How do you feel about the plan to reopen schools during the time of the pandemic? And it's a simple Google form that people can fill out. We want to hear from you. Feel free to answer the questions most relevant to you. The form is confidential. If you're okay with us publishing your answers along with your name and location, let us know in an appropriate box and we might follow up with you. I encourage you to think about comments as a party you're hosting. Very often journalists complain about how rotten comments are. And I think of a lot of news comment sections as if the journalists are hosting a physical party in a house, stocking the bar, turning on the music, turning on the lights, throwing open the doors, and then walking away, and hoping that all the strangers who come into your house are on their best behavior, will not trash the place, will be polite to each other. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. That's not how things work. If you think about what you do when you're hosting an actual party, you kind of monitor, you introduce people to each other, you welcome everyone, you make sure the food is refilled. If there's a mess, you clean it up. And if someone's causing a disturbance, has imbibed too much, is being a jerk, is being belligerent, you redirect them, you brew them a cup of coffee, eventually you kick them out, because that jerk doesn't get to dominate the party. And it's rude to the rest of the party goers to let that person dominate the party. So I really encourage you to think about any conversations you're hosting and what obligations you have as a host. Your community is not made up of jerks. A lot of times when we start to work with a newsroom, we hear from them, I just can't believe what jerks people are. And we have to remind them, like, you know, a lot of people in your community who are not jerks. People can seem extra jerkish on the internet. People who are inclined to comment might have more of a tendency to do that. A lot of people are reading and not commenting, and a lot of people are reasonable and you're not hearing from them. And if a jerk shows up to the party and dominates everyone's impression, it's hard to even see who else is there. So I hope you have a comment policy that outlines what behavior is encouraged and what will not be tolerated. And I hope you publish that and link to it and use it. And don't feel apologetic about deleting comments or banning people if they're ruining the experience for everyone else. So thank you so much for your time today. That is the end of what I have to share with you. My contact information is here, and we have a lot more examples of how the concepts we've talked about today are being put into practice in newsrooms, and I would absolutely love to see your examples of what you've tried as well. So I hope you get in touch. Thank you very much.